everyone, and welcome back to ISC Humanities Hub. I hope all of you are doing well and that your preparation is going great. If you are new here, a very warm welcome. This channel is specifically created for ISC Humanities students because if you've ever searched for ISC Psychology resources online, you'll probably realize that good ISC specific resources are quite limited. That's exactly why I started this channel to provide clear, exam oriented lessons that are simple to understand and completely based on the latest ISC syllabus. The entire playlist is designed for Class 11 ISC Psychology 26-27 batch. We'll be covering every chapter in a simple, interesting, and exam focused way. Throughout the series, I'll also be sharing exam tips, answer writing tricks, and common mistakes that students make. So make sure you stay till the very end. Before we begin, if you haven't watched the part 1 and part 2 of this chapter, they're linked in the playlist. I'll strongly recommend watching those first. In part 1, we understood what psychology is, the basic meaning, and the most important topic of this chapter, the schools of psychology. In part 2, we discussed the fields and applications of psychology. Very important again. Today's lesson builds directly on those concepts, so those two videos give you a much stronger foundation to start with. So let's explore one of the oldest and the most fascinating questions in psychology. What really makes us who we are? Is it something we are born with, or is it the world around us that shapes us over time? By the end of today's lesson, you'll have the answer. Before we jump into the concepts, let's quickly look at today's roadmap. We'll begin by understanding heredity and how characteristics are passed from parents to their children. After that, we'll briefly look at chromosomes and genes. Once that's clear, we'll move on to environment and understand how different factors affect us. Finally, we'll answer one of the biggest questions in psychology, which has a greater influence on human behavior, heredity or environment. We'll also be discussing topics like Huntington's disease, mental impairment, and the famous twin studies. These are some of the most interesting concepts in this chapter and are quite important from the ISC examination point of view as well. One small suggestion before we begin, keep a notebook beside you. Whenever I mention an exam tip or an important point, just jot it down. It will make your revision much easier later. All right, let's begin with the first concept, heredity. The first factor is something heredity. Now, don't let the word scare you. It's actually a concept you've probably studied in your previous class 10 biology. But don't worry, I'll start from the fresh and from the scratch. We're going to build it up step by step. Now, think about your own family. Maybe your grandparents often tell you you have your mother's eyes. Or maybe one of your siblings has brown eyes like your father, while you, the chosen one, have those exotic bluish green eyes that everyone says came from your great grandmother. But then the obvious question is, why you and not your poor sibling? How is it possible that you resemble someone who lived nearly 100 years ago? The answer lies in heredity. In psychology, heredity refers to the transmission of physical and psychological characteristics from the parents to the children through something called as genes. Notice one thing, I said physical and psychological. Most students immediately think of physical traits like height, eye color, or maybe that beautiful hair texture. And yes, those are the very perfect examples. But heredity can also influence other things like your natural abilities, your intelligence potential, your temperament, and even the likelihood of developing certain inherited disorders. Yes, it comes with both the positive and the negatives. That doesn't mean your future is already fixed. It simply means you're born with certain biological potentials. Let's see how this works in real life. Imagine two babies are born on the same day. One naturally has the potential to become quite tall because most people in the family are already tall. The other comes from a family where almost everyone is relatively shorter. Even if both children receive good nutrition, the first child is still more likely to grow taller because heredity has already provided a different biological foundation for that child. That's heredity. But here's where many students actually get confused. Heredity gives us a sort of a blueprint, but it doesn't always determine the final outcome. Imagine you're a constructor building a house. The blueprint tells you what the house can become, but whether it turns into that beautiful home or not depends on many other factors as well. And those other factors are exactly what psychologists called environment, which we'll discuss next. Before we move ahead, here's a quick question for you. What's that one characteristic people always say you have inherited from someone in your family? Maybe your smile, your voice, your height, your curly hair, or even the way you laugh. Pause for a moment and think about it. Then write your answer in the comment section. I genuinely enjoy reading your responses because they often become great real life examples for my future videos. Now, here's an exam tip. If the examiner asks you to define heredity, don't stop after writing just the textbook definition. Always include one or two suitable examples. You can use mine. It immediately shows the examiner that you have understood the concept instead of simply memorizing it. And even if you missed out a few keywords, a strong example will definitely fetch you marks. Now that's what we have understood what heredity is. Another question naturally comes to mind. If heredity gives us the biological foundation, then what role does the world around us or the environment play? Whenever students hear the word environment, the first thing that comes to their mind is trees, rivers, pollution, because that's what we have already been studying in geography or science. But psychology is different. The meaning is much broader. The environment refers to everything around us that influences our growth and development after birth. I repeat, everything. That includes the family, friends, teachers, school, culture, neighborhood, social media, the books we read, the language we speak, even the experiences we go through throughout our life. In simple words, environment is everything that shapes us after we are born. Let's look at an example that all of us can relate to. Imagine two children who are naturally equally intelligent. One grows up in a house where parents encourage questions, buy books, ask quizzes, appreciate learning, and motivate the child to do even better. The other grows up in a totally opposite environment, a home where education isn't given much importance. Now ask yourself, who is more likely to perform better academically? Most of us would choose the first child. Does that mean the second child wasn't intelligent enough? Not at all. It simply shows that the environment plays a huge role in helping our already inbuilt natural abilities to develop. Here's another one. Think about language. A child born in India could grow up speaking Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Bengali, or English, or any other language depending entirely on the environment in which the child is raised. These genes didn't decide the language, the surroundings did. That's the power of environment. At the same time, it's important not to misunderstand this concept. Environment cannot change everything. For example, no matter how much someone practices, environment alone cannot change their natural eye color or blood group. So the key takeaway here is some characteristics are mainly influenced by heredity, while many behaviors, habits, skills, attitudes are strongly influenced by the environment. An exam tip. A very common ISC question is to differentiate between heredity and environment. When that appears in your exam, don't just write the definitions. Support each definition with at least one suitable example. It's a small addition, but it makes your answer much stronger and helps you stand out. This is actually the answer to a popular question that in longer questions, such as a 5 or a 10 marker, why do students lag behind by 1 or 2 marks, even though the definitions or the concept which was stated in the book was clearly written? The answer is suitable, practical, application based case study or examples which need to be added as per the latest pattern. If you miss out on that, you are definitely going to lose marks. At this point, you might even be wondering, we have understood what heredity is, but how are these characteristics actually passed from parents to children? To answer that, we need to understand two simple biological terms: chromosomes and genes. Now, don't worry, I will repeat, we're not going into biology in depth. We only cover what you need for psychology. Every human cell contains tiny thread like structures called chromosomes. You can think of chromosomes as tiny storage files that carry all our genetic information. Inside these chromosomes are the even smaller units called genes. And genes are the real carriers of heredity characteristics. Let me give you an easy way to remember it, sharing one of mine. Imagine this as a bookshelf. The chromosomes are like the books kept on that shelf, and inside those chromosome books are the different chapters. And what are these chapters? These chapters are the genes, which each carry specific information about different characteristics. Let's say one gene has information related to your beautiful eye color, or maybe another one has your hair texture. Others may be responsible for blood group or certain inherited abilities. So, whenever we say that a characteristic is inherited, what we are actually saying is that the information has been passed from the parents to the children through something called as genes, the chapters. Now, if you look at the DNA image on this slide, don't worry about memorizing every scientific detail. For your psychology examination, simply remember this sequence: DNA, arrow genes, arrow chromosomes, which are the heredity characteristics. If you understand this relationship, you're more than enough prepared for your exam. There's one more interesting concept which we are going to do or understand before moving ahead. Have you ever noticed that a child sometimes resembles one of the parent much more than the other? Why does that happen? This is where dominant and recessive genes come into the picture. A dominant gene expresses itself even only when one copy is present. On the other hand, a recessive gene shows its effect only when both the copies are recessive. Let's make that much simpler. Imagine sitting in a classroom. Two students answer a question at the very same time. Two enthusiastic students. One speaks very softly, the other almost shouts. Whose answer is everyone likely to hear first? Tick tick one, tick tick two. Obviously, the louder one. Dominant genes work in a very similar manner. They express themselves more easily, while the recessive genes often remain hidden unless the right genetic combination is present. That's why some characteristics disappear for one or two generations and then suddenly appear again later. Remember the example we discussed a few minutes ago? The bluish green eyes, the chosen one, Harry Potter, inherited from a great grandmother. This concept helps explain how something like that can happen. And that's also why members of the same family look very much similar without looking exactly alike. So far, we have explored heredity. Now, let's come back to the second factor, environment, and understand why psychologists consider it equally important. Think about planting a seed. A healthy seed has the potential to grow into a strong tree. But if it is planted in a dry soil without enough sunlight or adequate hydration, water, will it reach its full potential? Probably not. Now imagine planting that very same seed in a fertile soil, giving it enough hydration, sunlight, and proper care. Its chances of growing into a healthy tree can increase dramatically. Human development works in a very similar way. Heredity provides you with the potential. Environment helps that potential grow. A few examples can be how a supportive family can build confidence or how a good teacher can inspire curiosity. So, when heredity gives us the certain possibilities, it's often the environment that decides how much of these possibilities are actually developed or, let's say, reach to their full successful rate. That's why psychologists never study one without considering the other in sync. Now we have reached one of the most important ideas in this chapter. Sometimes you even come across a question like this: which one is more important, heredity or environment? Many students make the mistake of choosing one of these, but in psychology, that's not the very best answer. The stronger answer is that both are equally important because they complement each other. Heredity gives us the biological foundation. Environment shapes and develops that foundation throughout life. Without heredity, there would be no inherited potential. And without a supportive environment, that potential may never fully develop. So instead of asking which one is better, psychologists focus on how both work together. This is an excellent point to remember for long answer questions and your CA questions, critical analysis or your critical reasoning questions, because it shows that you have actually understood the concept rather than simply memorizing textbook definitions. If you remember just one sentence from today's lesson, let it be this. Human behavior is a result of the interaction between heredity and environment. To understand how heredity influences human behavior in real life, let's look at two examples which are mentioned very well in your syllabus in bold words. First one is mental impairment. Mental impairment is a condition in which a person's intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior are below average. In simple words, it may affect how a person learns, solve daily problems, or even manage everyday activities independently. Now, if you look carefully at the left side of the slide, you'll notice something important. Heredity is one possible cause, but it is not the only one. Mental impairment may sometimes result from genetic disorders. However, it can also occur because of prenatal factors such as infections or alcohol consumption during pregnancy, birth complications, or even postnatal factors like severe infections or very commonly malnutrition. And that's an important lesson from psychology. Just because heredity plays a role doesn't mean everything is determined by genes alone. Proper medical care, early diagnosis, family support, special education can make a significant difference to a person's quality of life. Now, let's look at a second example, very, very important. Huntington's disease. Unlike mental impairment, Huntington's disease is a much clearer example of heredity at work. As you can see on the slide, it's caused by a defective gene, mainly found on chromosome number 4. A person who inherits this faulty gene has a very high chance of developing the disease later in life. Another point mentioned on this slide is that Huntington's disease is an autosomal dominant disorder. Now, don't let that term intimidate you. It simply means that a child needs to inherit just one copy of the defective gene from either parent for the disease to be passed on. You don't need to memorize all the medical terms for your psychology exam. Instead, just remember why this example has been included in your textbook. It provides one of the strongest pieces of evidence that genes can influence certain characteristics and inherited disorders. Now, have a look at the Did You Know box on the slide. One interesting fact about many genetic disorders is that they don't always appear at birth. Some conditions, including the Huntington's disease, may develop much later in adulthood. This means that a person may appear perfectly healthy for many, many years before even showing the basic symptoms. Before we move ahead, here's something I'd like you to think about. If one parent has Huntington's disease, what do you think are the chances of the child inheriting it? Uh, don't worry if you don't know the exact answer. We're not solving a genetics problem here. I simply want you to start thinking like a psychology student. It's high time. Um, Asking questions, making connections between different concepts, and trying to understand the why behind certain behaviors and conditions. If you have a guess, write it down in the comments. I'd love to read your thoughts. So far, we have explored heredity and environment separately. Now it's time to bring both the ideas together. In reality, they don't work independently, they work hand in hand. Take a look at the diagram in the center of the slide. It sums up today's lesson in one simple equation. Heredity plus environment gives you behavior. If there's one equation I'd like you to remember from this part of the lesson, it's this one. Think of heredity as the starting point you're born with. It gives you certain physical characteristics and natural potentials, but it is the environment, on the other hand, is everything that helps shape those potentials. Your family, friends, teachers, culture, experiences, culture. So, whatever you experience throughout your life. Together, they influence the way you think, feel, and behave. Let's understand this with an example. Imagine a child who inherits the potential to be highly intelligent. That's heredity. But if that child never receives the proper education, encouragement, or opportunities to learn, that potential may never be fully developed. So, what does this tell us? Neither heredity nor environment should be considered in isolation. Both are constantly interacting throughout our lives. Now, look at the think about it box on the slide. It asks a simple but a very important question. If two children behave differently, would what could be the reason? Is it because of our different genes, different environments, or maybe both? Take 10 seconds and think about your answer before continuing. Personally, if I were answering this in an exam, I'd choose the third option, both. That's because psychologists believe behavior is usually the result of the continuous interaction between heredity and environment. And that's exactly what makes every individual unique. At this point, a very obvious question comes to your mind. If heredity and environment always work together, then how did psychologists study their individual influence? After all, it's almost impossible to separate them completely in real life. This is where twin studies become extremely useful. Twin studies are among the most important research methods in psychology, and in fact, not just in psychology, even if you're studying sociology or other subjects, it is a really important topic because they help us understand how much behavior is influenced by genes and how much is shaped by the environment around. As you can see on the slide, there are two types of twins. The first type is identical twins, also popularly known as monozygotic twins. They develop from a single fertilized egg that later divides itself into two. Since they come from the very same egg, they share almost 100% of their genetic material. Very important. That's why identical twins often look remarkably similar and share many physical characteristics as well. The second type is fraternal twins, also known as dizygotic twins. Unlike the identical twins, they develop from two different eggs fertilized by two different sperm cells. As a result, they share only about 50% of their genes, no, just like any other random pair of siblings. That is why fraternal twins may look quite similar or sometimes not very similar at all. Now, here's the important part. Suppose identical twins who share almost the identical genes grow up together but develop different personalities, hobbies, or interests. That suggests the environment has played a very important role. On the other hand, if they continue to show remarkable similarities despite growing older, it highlights the strong influence of heredity. And that's exactly why psychologists have relied on twin studies for so many years. They provide the valuable evidence that helps us understand the relationship between nature and nurture. Now, mark this as very important, nature versus nurture, a very important topic. On this topic, you may even get a full fledged note writing question, maybe of 7 to 8 marks or more. This is really important. Now, let's make this idea even more interesting. Psychologists asked themselves another question. What if identical twins don't grow up together at all? Imagine two identical twins who are separated shortly afterward. One is adopted by a family living in a busy city with excellent schools, modern facilities, and completely different opportunities. On the other hand, the other twin grows up in a small village with different cultures, different education, and a completely different lifestyle. Now, remember something important. Their genes are almost identical, but the environments are completely different. Now, if psychologists compare these twins later in life, maybe in adulthood, they can get a much clearer idea of what characteristics are inherited and which are influenced by the experiences or the environment. When researchers carried out these studies, the results actually surprised them. Even after living apart for many years, many identical twins showed remarkable similarities within themselves. They often had similar personalities, similar intelligence level, similar tastes, similar mannerisms, and in some cases, even surprisingly similar career choices. Of course, they weren't exactly the same. Researchers also found important differences which are notable. Their language, their achievements, their values, beliefs, habits, and even social interactions with the same people reflected the environments in which they had grown. So, what conclusion can we draw from all of this? Number one, genes provide the basic blueprint. Number two, environment shapes how that blueprint develops over time. That's why separated twin studies provide some of the strongest evidence that both heredity and environment work together in shaping human behavior. Before we move to our final conclusion, I'd like you to think about one last question. If identical twins can remain so similar after growing up in completely different environments, what does that tell us about the influence of heredity? There's no need to answer it immediately. Just keep that thought in mind because it leads us perfectly into the final idea of today's lesson. We have reached the final concept. Let's go back to the question we asked at the very beginning. Which has a greater influence on human behavior, heredity or environment? So, because we have studied environment, heredity, genetic disorders, twin studies, we reached a very clear conclusion. The answer isn't heredity alone, and it certainly isn't environment alone. It's both working together, hand in hand, in synchronization. Human behavior is a result of the continuous interaction between heredity and environment. Think back to the seed example we discussed earlier. This also explains why two people can share similar genes and still grow into very different individuals. Even identical twins, despite sharing almost the same genetic material, never become completely identical because each person experiences their own part of the life, even under similar situations, differently. So even if you are asked the question in your exam, avoid choosing one side. A much stronger answer is to explain that how both develop dependently on over each other, and that behavior develops through the interaction of both. Now, an exam tip. This idea is often used in long answer and your critical reasoning questions. Instead of writing that heredity is more important or that environment is more important, explain how both interact and support your answer with examples. That immediately makes your response more analytical, which is exactly what the ISC board looks for, a new pattern where application is given more weightage. This you should keep in your mind. So, before we end today's session, I just wanted to share something that I think many of you might find helpful during your preparation. While preparing these lessons, I also organized my very own handwritten psychology notes according to the latest syllabus and the examination pattern, which has been quite changed. These are the same notes I use while planning these videos, and I have even updated them to match the current syllabus. They include the simplified explanations, the important definitions, critical thinking points, case studies, probable exam questions, answer writing guidance, quick revision notes, and a lot more. All organized chapter wise so that revision becomes much easier. My aim was to create the kind of notes that I personally wish I had when I was preparing, because the books are quite outdated and don't match the same example levels which are required today. So, if you're someone who prefers revising from concise, well organized notes instead of going through multiple books again and again, you can check them out using the details given in the description below. And of course, whether you study from the notes or not, I'll continue uploading complete, free of cost lessons for every chapter right here on the ISC Humanities Hub channel. And with that, we have come to the end of part 3 of chapter number 1, the subject of psychology. I really hope today's lesson helped you understand not just the textbook definitions, but the actual ideas and the why behind different heredity and environment concepts. If it did, I genuinely appreciate if you could leave a like on this video. It might seem like a small click, but for a new educational channel like this, it makes a huge difference. It lets me know that these lessons are actually helping you, and it even motivates me to keep creating more content for you ISC students. If you know a friend or classmate who's also preparing for ISC psychology, do share this video with them. Be a kind friend. One of the reasons I started this channel is because quality ISC resources are still quite limited online. So, if this lesson helped you understand the chapter even a little better, there's a good chance it could help someone else as well. And if you have any doubts, whether they're related to today's lesson, the previous topics, or even answer writing or even exam preparations, feel free to leave them in the comments below or even email me whenever you want. I personally read the comments and I try my best to reply because I want this channel to become a place where students like you can learn and grow together. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to ISC Humanities Hub and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the upcoming videos in this playlist. We've still got a lot more psychology to explore together, and I'm really excited to continue with this journey with all of you. Until then, keep revising regularly, stay curious, and most importantly, enjoy learning. And if you stayed with me till the very end, thank you. It really means a lot. It tells me that these lessons are making a difference, and that encourages me to keep creating even better content for all of you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.